Roger, thank you very much for agreeing to sit down with me and talk to us.
Guy, thank you for doing this series. It's courageous of you.
Oh, well, thank you. I know about you and your background, but please tell us and the audience here about where you live and where you work.
Well, I live in Tallahassee, Florida, but my wife Jan tells me that I flunked retirement, so we travel all over. Most of my time, many years, was spent with the Florida State University, where I was a professor in what was originally instructional systems, and now it's the Department of Educational Psychology and Learning Systems, and now the Center for Needs Assessment and Planning. We travel a lot, and we're having a good time, because there's something about our field that adds value to people who are willing. Napoleon Hill said in his famous selling book, he said, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And I think in our field, the student is really getting ready. So HPT, or whatever we call it, I think is a thing that's happening.
Yes. Let's go back to your first exposure to HPT. Can you tell us about the when and where, etc.?
Yeah, it was right after the earth cooled.
Thank you.
I was actually in the aerospace business. I had gone through experimental psychology and industrial engineering and started working at Martin Company in Baltimore. My boss was a peripatetic guy by the name of Tom Erline, and got interested in this training stuff. And one day he came in with an ad from the Wall Street Journal, and he said, look, they're looking for somebody to develop what's new in programmed instruction. And he said, let's apply, even though we're both working for Martin Baltimore. And so we sent about a 5-page telegram, and that was expensive then. Because even though they were masking, we knew it was the auto tutor out of Santa Barbara, California. Norman Crowder had invented the branching type programming, and what they were looking for somebody to develop it and market it. Tom got the first job, then he brought me on board. We moved to New York. I was supposed to go to Santa Barbara, but they moved the office after I quit at Martin Baltimore to New York, which was not my favorite place at the time, and started getting into programmed instruction. And at that time, it was very, very rich. That was the Center for Programmed Instruction, and we used to argue about whether programmed was spelled with one M or two M's. But we all had a common underlying rationale in this. Everything had to be research reference, performance-based, and we left the theology to other people, and it was all about measurable improvement of performance. And so that's when I first got into it. Then I went to work for Bolt, Beranek, and Newman. In spite of what Al Gore said, they were the ones, when I was there, invented the internet, and helped develop teaching machines, and off to Douglas Aircraft after that. So it was an awakening from asking the question of, if training was the solution, what's the problem? And just moving it on up there to talk about, first it's the learner, and then if the learner is successful, what's the value added to there? And then if that's successful, what is the value to your group, and the value added to your organization, value added to your external client, and some years later, the value that you add to our shared society. But that's another story. That was fomented by our son.
Yes. I know a bit of the story about your entree into NSPI at the time, before it became ISPI, and maybe you can combine this with telling us about some of your biggest influences in HPT, although it may not go simply back to that point in time. But tell us about your biggest influence and the people, the books that you've read that influenced you, etc.
Well, I've had good mentors, and I've been blessed by a great wife who's my greatest supporter and my greatest critic. Very early on, Tom Erline, which nobody knows. I think he went off into foreign service. Then I moved out to California and met Bob Corrigan. Bob Corrigan at that time had invented something called monitor teletest, where you had students sitting at workstations and the instructor could ask questions and get feedback. So you could see on real time that people had questions or they understood the concept. And then later on, when I was working at Douglas Aircraft, Bob got to one of the Litton Industries organizations, and it was there that some people blame me for it. I invented needs assessment because everybody was talking about we need this and we need that, and Corrigan and I were sitting around talking. And I said, "That's nonsense. Need is a gap in results, not a gap in process or resources." And so through his work with Litton and my work, we started talking about need as a noun, a gap in results, not a gap in process. So Bob Corrigan was really important. I guess Gabe Ofish, who pulled me into this, called me one day and when I was in New York with Walt Brannick and Newman and said, "Oh, you're starting a new organization with me. It's called National Society for Program Instruction. And not only are you going to sign on to the original group organization, but you're going to create and head up the New York chapter." So Gabe was a very, very interesting, energetic guy who really helped all of us in the field. As time went on, I was lucky enough to bump into a lot of people that were active in this field and looking at things from different perspectives. You know, like the blindfolded wise men patting the elephant and describing the different pieces of it. And it was there that I got the notion that there was something bigger than just HPT by itself. It was from working on this.
Thank you. Tell us about any of your recent books and articles. I know that you're continuously working here. You have failed retirement, I'm sure that's true. So what have you been working on?
Actually, the 39th book called The Assessment Book is out, and we're starting to get a lot of attention to that. What we do is use the concept of needs assessment, a gap between current results and desired results. And on the basis of performance statements, people and organizations can rank what is and what should be, so they can look at a data profile, and it goes anywhere from, guess what? Strategic thinking and planning, needs assessment, evaluation, culture, organizational culture. We have things are your readiness for change, readiness for distance learning, and so that's on. And somebody, the publisher of HPT Press, just said, "Well, Roger, why don't you write a manager's pocket guide to mega thinking and planning?" And I'm toying with that idea. I thought I'd written enough, but maybe I'm going to do that one next. I'm also working with some people on Stephanie Moore, who's now at the University of Virginia, had gotten interested in the issue of ethics. And I was on her doctoral committee where she, on the basis of mega thinking and planning, she tracked people to see whether anybody was concerned about societal impact or not. Came up with some really startling conclusions. Ingrid Guerra-Lopez, in her doctoral dissertation, looked at the same basic characteristics of societal, organizational, individual performance, process, and input, and found out that most people, when asked what is and what should be, said, "Well, societal impact is very important, but I don't do it." And so she said that was an ethical lapse. And so we're working on some articles on that, and we're having fun.
Very good. You seem to be. How about one or two quick stories on HPT efforts that you've been involved in? Again, I guess starting with the needs assessment and the kinds of interventions that you have worked with.
Well, let's go backwards from now. Probably the most exciting project is the ITSA, the Sonora Institute of Technology in Sonora, Mexico. It now has 6 campuses, or is that campi? I'm not sure. I was called in by the rector, Gonzalez Rodriguez, about 5 years ago. Took Jan and I out to dinner and said, after asking me to be the keynote speaker at their strategic planning conference, and said to me, "Well, now we know your mega planning works for a university, and your model calls for doing societal good and generating money. How about working with us to export this knowledge?" And I said, "That's interesting, but why?" So I can't count on the Mexican government or the Sonoran government to keep me properly funded. And so the idea of doing social good and making money, then I have money to reinvest in developing the field. And I said, you know, that sounds fascinating, Gonzalo. What do you have in mind? He said, no, that's why you're here. What do you have in mind? And so I drew up some ideas and started recruiting some good people. We now have a PhD in mega thinking and planning, an MBA, a Performance Improvement Institute, which now has 20 or so independent sponsors, built vary anywhere from the largest pork producer in Sonora to two of the largest builders, the largest veterinary vaccine company in Mexico, all using, excuse me, mega thinking and mega planning. And that's exciting. There's lots of things that we've done right. One of the really interesting things is I worked with the Coast Guard using the same model to develop decision-making under crisis conditions. And it was very basically simple, a six-step problem-solving model. The referent was MEGA, the societal value added or value subtracted, and it was very effective. They were silly enough to have given me a medal a few years ago for that. There was a kicker in that. Admiral Papp told me when he gave me the medal at the Williamsburg conference, he said, there's a ribbon that goes with this. And by the way, anytime you wear formal attire, you have to wear the medal, which is a little bit difficult to explain away. There's just lots of things where the concept of making societal value added the primary referent, it's starting to gain some momentum.
Yes.
Excuse me.
Many of us in the society talk about the 30-second elevator speech or something along those same lines here, but how do you quickly explain to somebody that's not in the know, what is HPT all about, and what language do you use as you explain that?
When Roger Addison first introduced me to that, he was running some workshops for ISPI, the elevator story, and I was standing around feeling smug, and he said, okay, Kaufman, what do you have in mind? And I said, oh God, I'm going to have to do something. And I said, if you're an elevator with somebody who can make some decisions that'll make some major changes, the closest I could come up is, let me show you how you can be successful and prove it. And the proving it is the one that we usually don't talk about. But it's so central to ISPI, the research-based, fact-based, accomplishment-based kinds of things. So that's my 30-second, doesn't take 30 seconds.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So you've told us a little about your current focus. You're writing some articles. Are you engaged in anything that's new for you, that you're expanding your knowledge base into some new areas?
Oh, the world is a learning laboratory. The students and faculty at ITSEN in Mexico, all the clients that I'm working with, I don't know where it's going to go, but recently just got back from Panama, the invitation of the President and the Minister of Tourism to see if mega thinking and planning can actually save the city of Colon. Colon is the Caribbean entrance to the Panama Canal. It has deteriorated into a crime-ridden, gang-dominated organization, city. And what we're charged with doing is Carmen Arias, who's a Panamanian, is putting together a group, very, very diverse, a guy who is an architect who actually did the plan and implementation for South of Market in San Francisco. Mariano Bernardo and myself, we're going to see if we can develop a plan to actually save Panama. It's the second largest city. That's exciting. There's projects that are going on with the largest pork producer in Sonora, Mexico, Grupo Parral. One of the things that Mariano designed in the doctoral program is you can't come alone to be a doctoral student. You have to be sponsored by an organization, and the organization has to agree to several things. Number one, to pay for the student. Number two, that the bosses have to come and learn the basic concepts and tools that you're learning, so there won't be any surprises. And number three, that your doctoral dissertation will be actually applied in the organization, so there's not this gap between theory and practice. And so that's always exciting kinds of things.
Very exciting, very exciting. As one of the few remaining active members, I can only think of two of you and Don Toasty, who are still active in the society today, still coming to the conference today.
And the society has survived us.
And we've survived you. Thanks to you. Tell us about some of your favorite people. You were at the very first conference, and so
Yes.
was Don. So you have a history, you have a knowledge of the people that go way back to our very beginning. And part of what I'd like to capture here is some of the stories of them professionally or just personal stories.
Can I be sued for these?
You possibly can. But if we start with Bill Detterline, it's less likely to happen. So I know that I've heard some very interesting stories about you and Bill Detterline. Bill Detterline actually living with you for a while. And
Yes.
so share some remembrances of Bill Detterline with us.
Well, Bill Detterline was an unrestrictable genius. He created the first workshops in what we would call performance improvement. The Army picked them up, the military picked them up, very successful. He was a brilliant kind of guy. One time when I was president of this society, we had a luxurious suite at the Washington Hilton. I think it was probably 200 square feet. It had a sitting room. He came to the reception, and then he said, "Okay, I'm going to go home." And he went out, came back about 10 minutes later. "Those SOBs locked up my car. I'm going to sleep here on the opening couch." And people were ignoring him, so he said, "Go home, everybody," and he started getting undressed so he could sleep. Between wives, Bill came down to stay with Jan and I for a while when we were living in La Mesa, and he fancied himself the greatest mixologist in the world for Ramos Gin Fizzes, and he insisted on making up batches of the stuff, and they were uniformly terrible. But he was quite a guy and quite a contributor to the field. The other guy was interesting was Tom Gilbert. Tom Gilbert infamously one time at San Antonio decided at some wee hours in the morning to dive into the swimming pool. The only problem was there wasn't any water in the swimming pool, and it was hard to get him back into action for this. But Tom was a guy who got a lot of people motivated. A lot of people built from his work, and he built from other people's work. Gary Romer, for instance, was one of the original contributors. He was in business with Tom, and Tom decided to swipe some material from him, but there was a synergy that went on. So Tom, of course, is one of the grandfathers of this organization. Died without our permission, and he was incorrigible, absolutely incorrigible. When he married his last wife, I think she did a lot to settle him down. The world's never been the same since then. Other people, boy, there was a lot of them.
How about Bob Baker?
Bob Baker is he was an interesting guy. Bob, for a guy, he got mad at me for saying this one time. For a guy who seemed so casual about it. And one time I wrote a review of his second edition of Preparing Performance Objectives, and I said, Baker makes it look so effortless. And he got mad at me. He said it wasn't effortless. Bob practiced what he preached. What he did is when he developed something, he did frame validation. He did validation over. He took his work very, very seriously. And then he developed the Mager workshops, which the Army painted olive drab and trained anybody on. I think Margot worked with him doing some marketing and course managing and things like that. We saw Bob and Elaine recently in Arizona, and he's going on. He's a famous novelist now. He writes novels. Like Detterline got into writing novels too, and a lot of people got into creative writing, and Mager has done very well at that.
Another one of our esteemed members is also an author. Joe Harless penned a fictional book a couple years ago, I think.
The one that I saw was
Black Warrior's Curse, that Joe had done. Joe Harless.
Yeah, no, there was another one that was about reforming education. I
Yes.
haven't seen the.
Oh, I'm losing track of the name of that one. But share some stories about Joe.
Joe, again, he's one of these people that's bigger than life. He developed some material, validate them, they're still being used. He sold the company out. Harless and his business partner, Claude Lineberry, were irrepressible. They brought life to everything that they touched. When they came to societies, they were biggest critiquers of crap, and would let you know the way professionals should do. And Joe was a doctoral student of mine. So was Clyde Lineberry at Catholic University. I was conned into serving on their committee because they were running out of faculty. And it's hard being a professor to people who know more than you do. And I don't think either one managed to graduate, but got to see them in a different role where they were supposed to be subservient to their professor. And of course, that was not in their response repertoire.
Not for either of them, I'm sure.
I miss Joe. I miss Claude too, because Claude probably as funny as Jonathan Winters, but brilliant. And these guys contributed a lot to the field, and we learned from each other.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of some of the other names on the Tucson 7. So how about Don Toasty, a long-serving member like yourself?
Don is a unique character. He did a lot with the Job Corps, and was always creating, always undervalued, because I don't know why he was undervalued, but I think that he didn't rise to icon status like he wished hoped he had. But he always has some insights. I remember at one of the meetings he was trying to talk about the field, and one of our recent past presidents at that time, who was talking about the big picture before he retired from academe, decided he was going to be a trainer, an instructional designer, and the hell with this organizational societal stuff. And Don just took him apart for it. And I guess that guy never forgave him. But Don has always been a rigorous, results-based kind of guy, and continues on that today.
Mm-hmm. What about Dale Breathauer?
Dale, probably the most introverted guy I know in many ways. We got him involved with the faculty at Itsen, a very, very valued member of the faculty. We had Gary Rumbler on the faculty, and again, he passed away without our permission. Dale, Ingrid Guerra-Lopez, Mariano Bernardes, Bob Carlton, were all members of the faculty. Dale is unique. Dale has said so many things that I wish I'd said but didn't. For instance, about Omega, he said, either you're adding value to society or you're subtracting it, which is very, very powerful. I found Dale, to this day, to be a very, very rigorous thinker, and but very quiet, very respected. When we were down at the beautiful city of where Itsen is located, everybody else would go out to dinner, and he'd want to go back to his room and work or rehearse or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
What a valuable guy he's been to the field.
You have many graduate students who don't come back from the old days of the early 60s and that, but are in the mix now with the leadership of the society, adding value. Who would you like to mention of that group?
Oh, there's so many. Probably Hannah Meyer, who's in Toronto. There's a lot of good people. The interesting thing about being a professor is that your graduate students make you look good. Of recent times, I could name many. Ryan Watkins, who's now at George Washington University, did some of the really creative, original work in performance-based distance learning. Doug Lay, who is now at Pepperdine University, has gotten into conflict resolution. Ingrid Guerra-Lopez, who is now at Wayne State University. All of these are future stars, or maybe they are right now, but they became their own people, and they built on what they learned and what they were able to do. And all three of them are still active now in ISPI.
Very, very active.
And if the future is based upon people like this, we're in good shape.
Speaking of the future, what would be your hopes or aspirations for the society and for the technology in any order?
Well, I hope we go back and recapture some of the basis of us being research-oriented and fact-based and performance-based instead of marketing-based.
Mm-hmm.
The early ISPI meetings we used to argue over data.
Mm-hmm.
And what does this mean? And you use this statistical technique, and that doesn't fit this. Dale Breathauer was, to get back to him, was always very good about saying, research is not just A/B control group studies. There's time series where each person serves their own control, which is a model which is much better suited to people like us who are interventionists. We want to change people.
Mm-hmm.
So I want us to get back more of that research performance space for the future. I also want us to see that this past, which is so rich, is just prologue to the future. And let's create the new future, what kind of world we want for our children and grandchildren. And I'd like to see people who are getting interested in the society stepping up and doing this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. You had a shorter than 30-second elevator speech on what is HPT, but can you give a similar treatment to MEGA for the audience?
Yeah, what kind of world do you want to help create for a Mars child? It's so simple. One day, a director of Microsoft, they hired me to come up and do some work, and she picked me up at SeaTac Airport, and we're driving in, and she said, when I first heard about MEGA, I thought it was a pile of crap. And she said, the more I think about it, it's just as obvious as that boulder at the side of the road. It's the elephant in the room. How can you deny it? And as Dale's statement is, if you're either adding value to society or subtracting it. And it's been a challenge to get people to get away from that encapsulated input, process, product model and say yes, and if we're successful at that, what would the result of that be? And if you're successful at that, what would that result be? So it's adding value to our shared world, which is pretty important because we all live there.
As a wrap-up here to our interview, what messages would you send to people interested in HPT but have not fully explored it yet? How would you encourage them?
That you have more power to contribute than you might think. That one of the nice things about generations that come by is there's more social conscience. And this isn't sort of a bleeding heart kind of thing, but you can change the world. You can be part of changing the world. And we've got some tools and concepts that can help. You can create more of them. But come join the adventure to make this a better place for our children and our grandchildren and be able to measure.
Roger Kaufman, thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me.